All right, welcome back to Vuln Vibes, everybody. Ready for another deep dive.
Always.
So today we're looking at Windows Hyper-V,
Mm-hmm.
specifically a zero-day vulnerability that was recently patched.
Right.
This is CVE-2025-21333. And I know we've got a lot of IT security pros in our audience,
Yeah, for sure.
so we're going to skip the Cybersecurity 101 stuff.
Right.
No need to rehash MIARE, ATT, and CK, or kill teams, right?
Not today.
What we really want to do is unpack this exploit and see what trends we can glean from it.
Definitely.
You know, see what it tells us about the threat landscape.
Absolutely.
Especially since we've got a proof of concept exploit for this one.
Oh, yeah, that makes it real.
Yeah, it does. Security researcher Alessandro Iandoli published that.
Right.
So it really drives home the potential impact here.
Definitely does.
So let's start with the vulnerability itself.
Okay.
CVE 2025-21333. CVSS score of 7.8.
Pretty high.
Yeah, that's enough to raise some eyebrows.
For sure. Means an attacker could potentially gain system privileges
Ooh.
on an affected Windows device.
Yeah, that's not good.
No, not at all. That's basically the keys to the kingdom.
So let's get into the weeds here a bit. How does this exploit work?
Okay, well, what's interesting here is Iandoli's approach.
Mm.
The PSC targets a specific driver.
Which is?
It's called VKRN-lintvsp.sys.
Okay.
And the goal is to get what we call arbitrary read-write capabilities in the Windows kernel.
So explain that for our listeners who might not be familiar with that term.
Sure. So arbitrary read-write, that's like the holy grail for an attacker.
Mm-hmm.
It lets them basically manipulate data however they want
Oh, wow.
in the system's memory.
Okay.
So in this case, Iandoli achieved this through an overwrite in the I/O ring buffer entry.
Mm-hmm.
But what's interesting is that he didn't use like the usual techniques.
Like what? What are some of those?
So, things like inquiry system information or previous mode, those are kind of the go-tos, but he went a different route.
Okay, so what did you do instead?
He used something called IOPMC buffometry structures.
Okay, and those are
Basically, they're blueprints for how the system handles data transfers.
between different components.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And by manipulating these structures, he gained control over a single entry in the IOIND objector reg buffers array.
All right. And that's what lets him do the arbitrary read-write.
Exactly. Having that granular level of control.
Huh. Fascinating.
It's pretty clever.
It is. So he's essentially hijacking these data structures to take control, right?
Exactly.
And with that level of control, like, what could an attacker actually do?
Oh, I mean, the possibilities are pretty much endless.
Yeah.
They could execute malicious code.
Right.
They could steal sensitive information.
Right.
Really anything you can imagine.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful stuff.
It is.
So let's talk about the proof of concept itself, Iandoli's POC. Are there any interesting details there that, our listeners should be aware of?
Yeah, there are a few things. First off, this PEC, it requires Windows Sandbox to be enabled.
Okay.
So that means the exploit can only work on systems with a very specific configuration.
Right, so it's not just about knowing the vulnerability. You've got to know how the system's set up, too.
Exactly. And this is something we're seeing more and more.
Mm-hmm.
These modern 0 days, they're often targeting these niche configurations, which makes them harder to detect and mitigate.
So it adds another layer of complexity for defenders, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so what else is interesting about this PEC?
Well, Iandoli achieved a 0xF0 byte overflow.
Okay.
But controlling the length of that overflow, that's still a bit unreliable.
Okay.
And it can actually cause the system to crash sometimes.
So it's not a guaranteed thing,
Yeah.
even if you get the exploit right.
Right. It just shows you how delicate this whole process is.
Right. So what else makes it so complex?
Well, the exploit, it relies on freeing and reallocating specific Windows Notification Facility state data objects.
Okay, now those are.
So those are objects that the system uses for communication and event notifications.
Okay.
The attacker needs the memory to be laid out a certain way,
Mm-hmm.
and they have to manipulate these WNF objects to get it that way.
Right. And what's the catch?
It introduces what we call race conditions.
Okay, and race conditions are.
Basically, it means there's a timing element.
Okay.
So the attacker is trying to free and reallocate these objects to get that specific memory layout.
Mm-hmm.
But other system processes could interfere.
Right. So it's like they're trying to set up the dominoes just right.
Exactly.
And something else could come in and knock them over.
Exactly. Like another driver could allocate objects in the memory that the attacker just freed up.
Wow, so it's a really delicate process.
It is. It is.
So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about mitigation.
Okay.
Obviously, patching is key.
Right.
Microsoft addressed this back in January on Patch Tuesday.
Right.
But beyond patching, are there any other takeaways here for our listeners?
I think, this 0 day really just emphasizes the ongoing arms race. Attackers and defenders.
Yeah.
We see it time and time again. Exploits are just becoming more and more intricate, more complex. They're relying on these really specific configurations.
Yeah.
So defenders, they really need to be proactive.
So what would that look like in practice? What can our listeners do to be more proactive?
Well, the first step is understanding your systems deeply.
Okay.
Knowing what configurations you have, what features are enabled,
Right.
things like that. You can't just rely on knowing your operating system and software versions anymore. You need to go deeper.
Right.
Understand how all these components interact.
Right. So it's not just about patching. It's about knowing the context.
Exactly.
Knowing where the vulnerabilities might be hiding.
Exactly. And that knowledge, that's what informs your whole security strategy. You might decide to disable certain features, implement stricter access controls,
Right.
or even adopt, some more advanced threat detection tools.
Right.
Things that can catch these more subtle attacks.
Right. Because those traditional tools, they might miss this stuff.
Exactly.
So the key takeaway here is, staying ahead of these threats, it takes work.
Oh, yeah.
It takes vigilance.
Definitely.
It takes continuous learning.
Absolutely.
And a really deep understanding of your systems.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So it's a challenging landscape out there.
It is.
But by understanding the trends, understanding the techniques that these attackers are using, we can be better prepared.
Absolutely. And we have to give credit to the vulnerability researchers out there.
Right.
People like Alessandro Iandoli.
Yeah.
They're doing crucial work.
Absolutely.
Helping us understand these threats.
Right. And develop effective ways to mitigate them.
Right. So if you want to check out Iandoli's proof of concept, you can find it on GitHub.
Yeah, go take a look.
For educational purposes, of course.
Of course. Don't go using it for anything malicious.
No, don't do that. And be sure to join us next time for another Vuln Vibes Deep Dive.
We'll be back.
Where we'll continue to unpack all the latest threats and trends in the world of cybersecurity.
Stay safe out there.
Until next time.